Previously on Practical Research 1. In the previous lesson, we talked about the nature of research and the different types of research approaches, namely the quantitative and the qualitative approaches. Furthermore, we also talked about the strengths and weaknesses of the different approaches, as well as their unique characteristics. This time around, we will learn about the standards that must be observed when we write researches, both quantitative and qualitative. And with that, good day, students, and welcome to Practical Research 1, Lesson Number 2. For this video, we are going to talk about the ethical research practices, both for quantitative and qualitative research. And for this video, we aim to achieve the following objectives. By the end of this lesson, hopefully you will be able to define research ethics, identify the different general aspects of research ethics, and lastly, to determine the effects when research ethics are violated. For this lesson, we are going to cover the following areas. First, we are going to discuss and look into the understanding about general ethical practices in research. We will then proceed to the discussion of the common ethical standards in research and explaining each standard. Finally, we are going to talk about the violations to the ethical practices in research, as well as the sanctions that could be imposed when these ethical practices are not upheld. So to begin, let's go to objective number 1. Let's try to get an understanding of what general ethical practices are observed in research and how they are understood. Now, it is common knowledge that any research activity must be conducted with the highest quality of standard in mind. It has to be top-notch. And that being said, there are certain standards which must be upheld and observed in order to ensure that quality and to make sure that the research output in itself is of the highest quality. Now, while there are different agencies which look into the ethical standards of researches being published all across the world, it is important to determine the general ethical practices which are common among all research activities, regardless of the exclusivity of the policies in that organization or institution. So let's discuss them one by one, and let's proceed to objective number 2. The common ethical standards that we usually find in research are the following. We have honesty, objectivity, integrity, carefulness, openness, respect for intellectual property, confidentiality, responsible publication, non-discrimination, competence, legality, animal care, and human subject protection. Now, you might ask, are all these found in qualitative research? Could be, but for the sake of this video, we are going to talk about the common ethical standards which are applied both to quantitative and qualitative research. And with that, let's try to look deeper and dig deeper into these standards and try to understand how they can be observed and how they are understood in terms of research. For honesty, this means that you must report data, results, and procedures, as well as the status of your publication in as transparent a manner as possible. You must never manipulate data to favor your intended results, and that entails that you must never fabricate the results. Also, the data that you collected from your respondents or your participants must be presented as they are, with no changes whatsoever to the values or the interpretation of the data. For objectivity, your study must be free from biases in terms of design, data analysis, data interpretation, peer review, grant writing, or even expert statements just to yield favorable results. What does this mean? This means that your study must never be conducted in order to favor a certain organization or to collect data simply from a very specific group of people that you know will give you the data that you need. Again, this one is connected to the first standard, which is honesty. No manipulation of data, no changing of the results, no alterations of the interpretations. Also, you have to make sure that the process of research in itself does not favor a specific group of people or an organization for that matter. So we have to make sure that it is objective, and we have to make sure that it is free from biases. Third, we have integrity. And under integrity, it implies that all agreements made between the researcher and the participants must be honored. Researchers must act with sincerity and consistency at all times. In researches, we usually make promises to our participants, especially when we are recommending actions. Okay? We give them statements such as, we are going to use this data to come up with an action plan. And if that promise has been given to your participants, then you have to make good with that promise. You should never, ever make promises that you do not intend to keep. If you promise them that their identity will remain confidential, then you have to keep it confidential. If you agree to compensate them for their participation in your study, then compensation must be given. So again, observe integrity at all costs. Next is carefulness. Researchers must check for the accuracy. This one is in the results and the way that the results are interpreted. And you have to make sure that the study is free from errors. Maybe errors in punctuations, sometimes in spelling, these are common in research papers, but we are looking at the results. We are looking at the interpretations. They must be free from errors because they might have catastrophic effects if these errors are not checked or fact-checked. This one is very evident, especially in quantitative research or experimental research, wherein when the values are not correct, then the entire study might collapse. So carefulness is needed. You have to make sure that you check, double check, and triple check the results before they are published. Negligence must be avoided at all times, and as a researcher, you must develop a sense of patience and diligence to go over your materials carefully many times in order to avoid compromising the quality of your research. Next, we have openness. Now, for openness, this one has something to do with the results of your study and the way that it is published. Okay, so you have to share the results of your study to the community. For example, if you are conducting a research involving a school, then the results have to be shared with that research locality, because the results could help that institution to improve if that is what your research is all about. The most important thing to remember is that sharing the results of your research could contribute to the body of knowledge. If you are conducting a research about biomechanics or quantum physics or sociology or anthropology, then the results of your study could help to enrich and nourish the existing body of knowledge in that particular field. So one must be open to criticism when publishing the results, because again, you cannot please everybody and there will be people who will be a bit skeptical about your results. So be open to criticism, because criticism, especially the constructive ones, they help in developing the research. Okay? It is through constructive criticism that we are able to improve the study, and in turn, we improve ourselves in the long run. So again, openness, share the results, and once you do, be open for or to criticism. Next, This one is very important, especially for you students. This one is respect for intellectual property. Researchers must honor patents, copyrights, and other forms of intellectual property. In your case, in the academic level, most likely for undergraduate and graduate studies, it is important that you also honor the contributions, the statements of these authors, especially when you cite them or when you use their statements in your study. Most of the time, people forget to cite their sources. And this is one of the most basic forms of respect for intellectual property, to cite your sources properly. So make sure that whenever you use an external source or a statement given by some other expert, you have to include the in-text and the reference citations in your research paper. And you have to make sure that they match. For every in-text citation that is found inside your paragraphs, there must be a counterpart for the reference citation. Okay, so we will count the number of in-text citations, and then we match them to the number of reference citations found at the end of your research paper. Next, this one is very important. Okay, it's confidentiality. This is confidentiality not of the researcher. Okay, your identities will always be exposed, but this one has something to do with the information that you're going to use in your study or the identity of the people who are involved in your research. So confidential information such as grades, participants' identity, grants for publication, personnel records, military secrets, or patient records are considered to be privileged information and must always be protected. You must never divulge grades, patient records, military secrets in your study. Not even append them, okay? Do not append these documents. Instead, they are for your eyes only as the researcher. Most likely for a senior high school or a high school research paper, you might not be given access to personnel records in your school or patient records or military secrets, but definitely you will have a hand probably in acquiring student grades. Probably you can be allowed to see those. Or the most basic form of confidentiality is actually participants' identities. You have to make sure that you don't divulge the actual names of your participants, but give them nicknames, code names that you can use in order to associate the participant's identity with the results in your study. Moving on, we have responsible publication. You might be asking, are we going to publish our own researches? In light of the adjustments made during the quarantine, probably not, but definitely in the future, you will be given the opportunity to publish your researches. And when you do so, you have to do it responsibly. Your researches must be published in order to contribute to the existing body of knowledge. And this has been mentioned earlier. And it must also be used to help advance further certain researches being done in that field. The more research done on a field of knowledge would be good in making sure that that field or body of knowledge is nurtured and improved in the long run. So let's say in the field of education, much research has been done in the field of education, and I think that the developments being applied or implemented in the education sector is a product of the different researches which have been conducted in previous years. So we have non-discrimination. Okay? For non-discrimination, we have to avoid discriminating participants based on their race, their gender preference, their ethnicity, or other aspects which are not relevant to your research. If they are relevant to your research, then you can discriminate or choose or select a specific group of people who fit a particular profile. But if it does not help your research, or if it is not relevant to your research, then by all means do not discriminate participants. Do not say that I'm not going to use you as, or I'm not going to ask you to participate in my study because you look sketchy, or I'm not going to ask one of my classmates to participate because he constantly gets failing grades. That is a form of discrimination, and we have to avoid that. We have to make sure that we give all the people an equal chance to take part in your research if the research demands such. But if your study requires you to choose a specific demographic, then you have to explain that in your research, that for the purpose of this study, I am only going to select X type of participant or Y type of participant in order to acquire the data that I'm going to need. Okay, we also have competence, and I think that this is pretty much self-explanatory. When you create a research paper, it should not be a hodgepodge of just different stuff. It must not be done with a sense of mediocrity, but with competence, with excellence. So a researcher must improve his or her own level of competence through continued education and through the conduct of more and more researches. Many people are actually traumatized after the first time that they write a research paper, but you can only improve in the field of research, and you can only enrich your knowledge regarding a body of knowledge or a particular field. You can only improve that by ensuring, okay, by making yourselves better. And you can only do that through continued education or through the conduct of more research. You don't just stop with one research. If possible, you can even continue your own research. Look at it from a different perspective. Look at it from a different angle and see if you yield the same results. That way, you approach one research topic, one research problem from different vantage points, which is a good thing. The more we know about a research problem, the more we know about a research topic, the better we understand it. Okay, next we have legality. Of course, a researcher must see to it that all procedures and content in the research is in accordance with certain standards set by governing agencies and the law. What does that imply? Let's say your school requires you to cite all your sources, which is pretty much common among all the institutions. It is a basic policy that you have to cite your sources, or else you are going to suffer, or you're going to be charged with plagiarism. And in schools, to commit plagiarism is considered as academic dishonesty, which in many institutions across the country is considered as a major offense. So, if you want to observe legal practices in your study, you begin by observing the most basic policies: to cite your sources, to never fabricate results, never use pre-made results and then submit it as your own. That's actually stealing. Okay, so these are just examples of certain legal practices that you can observe while writing a research paper. Also, you must never break laws in order to write your research papers. For example, you want to know the plight or the experiences of abused women, battered women. So what you did is you contacted a friend and then you beat her up to a pulp and then ask her questions related to your study. That is already a violation against women's rights. Okay, so you should not break a law just to acquire the data that you need for research, and ensuring that legality is observed and legality is maintained in the entire process. Next, we have animal care. For animal care, proper care and respect for animals must be observed in the conduct of the study, and no unnecessary or ill thought of procedures must be done to animals. I guess this has something to do with animal testing as well, especially for companies which involve the use of animal testing. So, we must make sure that no undue or unnecessary harm should be imposed on these animals except when necessary, when deemed utterly necessary, especially in the field of medicine. Probably um, this one applies to them the most because I don't think that we do animal testing in the field of education or sociology. Okay, so I think that this one is most appropriate to the field of medicine wherein certain tests on animals are being conducted. Lastly, we have human subject protection. And this one is common to both quantitative and qualitative research because usually the participants or the respondents in your study are people. So, for human subject protection, when conducting researches for human subjects, make sure to minimize harm and risks. There must be a valiant effort to increase or maximize the benefits that they receive for participating in the research. What is one example of human subject protection? Okay, say that you're conducting a research amid this quarantine, this pandemic. You must never require your participant to go out of their household just so you can conduct an interview. That is subjecting your human participant to unnecessary risk. You can always conduct your interview online, or you can probably do it via written correspondence, but make sure that you do not subject your human participants, your respondents to harm or to risks. If there are risks involved, then make sure that they are duly informed and that they consent to taking those risks just so that they can participate in your study. This has something to do with being open and honest about your research, especially when dealing with your participants. So those are the common standards, the common ethical standards that are being observed across the different institutions, both for quantitative and qualitative research. So what happens when these standards are not observed? What happens if we violate those standards or we willfully do not follow? Well, ethical violations are considered to be mortal sins, especially for REBs or research ethics boards. Okay, they are the ones that review the validity of your research and the ones that will also conduct a review based on the soundness of the research process. Okay, did you observe the research standards in the conduct of your study? If not, then the REB or the Research Ethics Board will be the ones to decide on certain sanctions that can be imposed on you as the researcher along with your co-researchers. So when these violations are committed, the REB may summon or may be summoned to review the violation and determine the sanctions. And these sanctions can range from a mere rejection of the research because, we think that your research is not really ethical. Okay, it has so many violations, it is not sound, and it does not have a good foundation. So we're rejecting your proposal and you have to come up with a better one. So that's the least that they can do. Okay, reject your paper or maybe suggest improvements or alterations to your study in order to uphold the highest form of standards. But when the violations are committed while the research process or while the collection of data is underway, okay, so while you are conducting your research, that's when you committed the violation. What can an REB do? Okay, well, an REB might refer you to the authorities, and we do not want that. In most cases, grave offenses such as legal violations, okay, violations to the law, might merit imprisonment, and that's the worst that can happen to you when your research is deemed as uh, a false research, or it is already rejected based on the merit of the or based on the grounds that the researcher committed a felony while conducting the research. Then that's like hitting two birds with one stone. Your research gets scrapped and you go to jail. So let's do our best as researchers to make sure that we abide by the policies given to us, and to be careful, especially in the research process. Keeping in mind that our actions will have consequences, and when we put in good work, then the consequences are going to be favorable. And when we violate these standards, when we violate these practices, these guidelines, then we should expect that the consequences will be dire. So, with that being said, I believe that wraps up our lesson for today. We have achieved the objectives that we set at the beginning of this video. In the next video, we will be talking about the first chapter for research, or for qualitative research, and that is the research introduction. So, with that, this is Sir Dardar. Thank you very much for watching this video. I'll see you in the next video. Class dismissed.